You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Tensions across the country remain high 1 week after an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis. The shooting has sparked nationwide protests, including in the Seattle area. Accounts of what happened have split along political lines. Protesters say the ICE agent, who has since been identified as Jonathan Ross, summarily executed an innocent civilian who was trying to flee. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has said that Good was threatening ICE agents with her car and engaging in, quote, domestic terrorism. Since the shooting, the administration is doubling down on its immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities. The number of federal immigration enforcement agents deployed in Minnesota is expected to reach 3,000 in the coming days, the largest operation in U.S. history, according to DHS. Now, Democratic lawmakers are calling for more accountability from ICE. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal represents Washington's 7th Congressional District, and she's here for more. Congresswoman, good to see you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Libby. Thanks for having me.
So 1 week after Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed, just your reaction to everything that has happened in this very difficult week for the country.
Libby, it's been horrifying to watch, first of all, what happened in Minneapolis, then to watch the administration's characterization and lies about what happened, and then to watch their character assassination of Renee Nicole Good, and now to watch their insistence on essentially trying to also investigate Renee's wife, the widow, Becca Good, instead of an independent investigation into the ICE agent who shot her. And so we have, as you know, I'm the top Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee. We have taken over the last two Judiciary Committee hearings and turned them into a referendum on what happened in Minneapolis. We have played the videos, both of the shooting and of the battering down of doors, the other violent incidents that are happening across Minnesota. And I think that, we have to continue to support the American people who have watched that video, across party line, have watched that video and know what their eyes tell them, and that it is completely different from the administration's take on this. Yesterday, I had an amendment to have an independent investigation into this shooting, and every Republican voted against it. So I think we are in a very dangerous moment where the government is not only lying to us about what happened, but also using the weight of the federal government to perpetrate and perpetuate that lie.
You mentioned that across party lines, people are seeing what happened in the video. I just want to quote a Quinnipiac poll that came out in the last day or so. It was taken in the days after the shooting. 77% of Republicans who watched the video said they thought that the shooting was justified. Much higher percentage of Democrats feel that the shooting, 92% said the shooting was not justified. Interestingly, independents break with Democrats saying that the shooting was not justified. A majority of Americans say that they do not believe it was justified. You mentioned the investigation or the intent to investigate Renee Nicole Good's widow, Becca Good. We saw that 6 federal prosecutors, including the acting U.S. attorney for Minnesota, resigned. And the reporting is that it was over partially this intent by the Justice Department to investigate Renee Nicole Good's widow. What does that tell you about how this investigation is going to be conducted, Congresswoman?
I think it tells us that the investigation is not going to be fair. And I will say that I entered the article about those prosecutors resigning that was in the New York Times yesterday into the record and read from the article, because what's important to know is that that acting attorney general, U.S. attorney in Minnesota that resigned, the top federal prosecutor, is actually a Trump appointee. He was the prosecutor that was leading the fraud investigation in Minnesota. But that fraud investigation has been used by the government to surge resources into ICE agents and Border Patrol agents. Now, I think we're going to be at 3,000 agents in Minnesota between the initial 2,000 and now apparently they're sending another 1,000 into Minnesota. People have described it in the state of Minnesota as an occupation, as a siege. And I think that is what residents see and feel in the videos that are coming out. The fact that that prosecutor and 5 others stepped down because reportedly they were being forced to investigate Becca Good, Renee's widow, instead of the ICE agent, I think is extremely telling. And again, I spoke to Attorney General Ellison, Minnesota's state attorney general, this weekend, and he said that and this has been reported as well, that the fact that the federal government refuses to share information about the investigation so that the Minnesota law enforcement officials can conduct an investigation. Usually that's done in conjunction. But at this point, it appears that they're going to have to be separate investigations, but that the state law enforcement officials are not going to have access to whatever the federal government has. That's just not the way any of these investigations should be conducted. And for people who say that, we're jumping to conclusions and things like that, I would just remind everybody that the first person to jump to conclusions was Kristi Noem when she went on television and stated that exactly, what she wanted people to believe happened, which was completely different from what happened, and prejudged Renee as a, quote, domestic terrorist. That is just outrageous. And then, of course, when she got Donald Trump to go up and back her up, and then J.D. Vance and the rest of the cascading.
You mentioned Keith Ellison, the attorney general there in Minnesota. Minnesota has sued the Trump administration over this ICE deployment. The attorney general there called it a federal invasion. At this point, is that the only path open that you see to providing a check on what ICE and CBP and the DHS is doing in Minnesota? Is there any opening for Congress here to provide oversight? You mentioned that Republicans have not been getting on board with your efforts.
Well, 100% there's an avenue for Congress to do something about this, and that is the funding. The DHS appropriations bill is up it has to be approved before the end of the month. It was apparently on a glide path to going there, which I don't think should have been the case, but that seems to have been where it was before. It is certainly not the case now. And we have to remember that this Department of Homeland Security under Kristi Noem has been lawless, unaccountable, violating people's rights, people within the department in leadership positions going against court decisions, like Bovino, and, actually being out there and disobeying judges' orders. And so I think the American public has seen how unaccountable both ICE and Border Patrol are. They already appropriated in their big bad betrayal bill, they put $170 billion into ICE and CBP. They tripled the ICE funding. And I think that now we have to be very clear that we can't continue to fund DHS additional appropriations when we have zero accountability, guardrails, protections for the American people. And so I have, as the ranking member of the subcommittee, put together a list of a number of things that we need to ensure are a part of any additional funding. And if they aren't, we should not vote for that appropriations bill. And look, I think that there are serious considerations. Obviously, there's a lot here, but you should have a warrant for an arrest. That is a very basic thing that every person should have. Now they are going into homes in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and battering down with battering rams, battering down somebody's door. That is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which avails every citizen and non-citizen of the same rights. The Fifth Amendment, due process, not being taken seriously. The mass detentions that multiple judges across the country have ruled against, and yet they continue. So I just think that Congress has a very important role to play, and we cannot give up that authorization and that appropriation power that we have.
I'm talking with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington's 7th Congressional District. She represents Seattle and some surrounding areas, about the ICE killing of Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis 1 week ago. Congresswoman, you brought up the issue of the federal investigators who were in charge of the fraud investigation there in Minnesota, many of them stepping down. What you hear from the Trump administration and supporters of this escalating immigration enforcement operation in Minnesota is that it centers on this ongoing fraud investigation. And we know more than 60 people have been convicted of hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud there in Minnesota. There have been investigations for some time. Basically, it's stolen taxpayer dollars that people, were diverting illegally. Most of the people who have been convicted are part of the Somali community. How seriously do you take the issue of fraud? And do you believe, as the administration says, that it justifies this immigration crackdown?
The fraud investigation was actually started under the Biden administration. It is important. We do need to investigate fraud. But I would just point out, as I did in committee yesterday when we were debating bills that were supposedly around fraud, that this administration has allowed fraud to continue in numerous areas and, in fact, has reversed fraud investigations that delivered real settlements to the American people. Big banks that were defrauding customers, all kinds of places where this administration has allowed fraud to continue and, in fact, encouraged it to continue. So I just think we should be clear that fraud is an important issue. They are doing many things to undermine accountability around fraud. And now they are using fraud as a way to justify immigration enforcement and to actually ban entire groups of people based on their country of national origin, not based on their citizenship. The majority of immigrants in Minnesota are actually U.S. citizens and green card holders. There's a relatively small portion of undocumented immigrants. It's about 100,000, I think, if I'm correct on the numbers. Quite small in the grand scheme of things. So what they are now doing is creating an entire second class of U.S. citizens who are going to be examined, investigated, denaturalized because of their country of origin, not because of their immigration status as U.S. citizens. And so I think it's incredibly dangerous. And as somebody who is one of only 24 naturalized citizens to serve in Congress, I think that the way in which they are casting suspicion on entire groups of people based on where they were born, what they look like. Now you're talking about denaturalizing people based on some investigation into fraud and classifying entire groups of people as threats to the United States. So, I mean, there's so many dangers to this. In addition, we haven't talked about public safety, but they have moved all of the law enforcement that should be working on real criminal investigations. They've moved them away from that and into immigration enforcement activity. 25% of FBI agents are now working on this instead of what the FBI should be working on that protects the national security and safety of all Americans.
What does accountability look like for ICE and CBP at this point? I mean, in Washington state yesterday, lawmakers in Olympia held a public hearing on a bill that would ban law enforcement from wearing face masks. There was a similar bill passed in California, but the Trump administration is challenging it. Last year, you said that the agency was acting like a terrorist force. What do you think accountability looks like? Like what needs to happen with ICE and CBP?
They need to be completely reimagined. They need to have completely new leadership. They need to have completely new rules of how they function. They need to have prosecutions of officers that violate the law. I mean, none of that is happening now. Am I confident that you can ever reform an agency that has been so badly corrupted? I don't know, Libby. I really don't know. But I think at a minimum, we should be able to say that we are not going to continue to fund that agency without significant accountability and guardrails. And one of them is, by the way, that nobody should be masked. We need sharing of information between state and federal law enforcement officials. We need these individuals to be prosecuted to the full extent, not to go after the widows of people who have been shot by ICE. We need to make sure that we have a warrant for arrest. We need to ensure that if there are violations of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of any amendment of the Constitution, but certainly what we're seeing of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, we need to actually hold those officers accountable. We need to make sure to end the use of these for-profit detention centers that are jailing people with violations of human rights all over the place. So there are many things I think that we can do in our appropriations language to before we continue to fund these rogue agencies.
Congresswoman, you've recently said that Congress is living in two realities, and it was a reference to these contradictory narratives about what happened to Renee Nicole Good when we have multiple video angles. I guess my final question to you is, how do we move forward as a country if we cannot agree on basics of reality, of basics of truth?
I think that is the question I'm struggling with. You know, that I said that last week because we literally went from January 6th, the anniversary of January 6th, where I was trapped in the gallery and law enforcement officials that were protecting us and the United States Capitol were killed. And then 1,500 insurrectionists were pardoned by Donald Trump. They've been trying to rewrite the history of what happened on that day for 5 years. And then the shooting of Renee Nicole Good happened. And again, you had an immediate attempt by the federal government to rewrite what happened that day and to use the weight of the federal government to do it. And we have just continued to see that this is the strategy of this government. And there's the reality of what the American people see on television with the shooting, with the January 6th events, with what's happening to their health care being stripped away from them, and the realities of the difficulty of living on the ground while billionaires are getting richer. And then there's the reality that the White House wants to project and has a lot of power to do because of the power of the federal government. So the only way I know to fight back against that is to refuse to concede to their narrative and to continue to challenge Republicans and the country. And the polling that you mentioned, I think, is changing as we speak. I saw some polling the other day that, even Republicans are getting uncomfortable with this. I can see it in the hearing room. When I play the videos, they're uncomfortable. They do not, it's only 3 or 4 that want to speak up.
Well, you even saw the president change what he had said when the New York Times reporters confronted him with the video. He had said that Jonathan Ross had been run over, and he watches the video and he backs off.
And he even said maybe Renee Nicole Good was a good person, but she acted in a bad way. I mean, you see it, right? You see them adjusting to the fact that their narrative is not holding. So I would say to people that are listening, do not give up on telling the right story about what happened, the right narrative about what happened. Secondly, we in Congress have to hold these people accountable. And Democrats do have tools to do that, certainly in the Senate where they need 60 votes, and even in the House where we need to have this be a Democratic position, not just a position of a few people. This is happening in every district across the country. And on Friday, I will be holding my 6th hearing. It will be on the ground in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We will have 26 to 28 members of Congress present from all over the country. And we will have testimony from U.S. citizens, from law enforcement, from others in the area about what happened. Because if they won't hold hearings, we can. It is really important that people understand we are not backing down. We have to step up our efforts. And the fact that people turned out across the country immediately on the shooting of Renee Good is really important. Why do we even have what we have? Because somebody filmed it. A bystander filmed it. So do not think you are powerless. You can film these things. Those efforts of groups around the country to create these accountability groups that are filming, that are blowing whistles, that are right there when ICE is there and Border Patrol are there, are really important. They end up being the bedrock of court cases. It's just not going to be easy, I guess, but it is so critically important.
Congresswoman, we'll share information about how people can watch that hearing. And I just thank you so much for your time today, Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington's 7th District. Appreciate you sharing your perspective and for being here with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.